Pack your desk, Roger. You're finished here. The words hit me like a sledgehammer as 2,500 employees watched from the factory floor and break rooms across our 4 plants. Chad Winters stood at the podium, his Harvard MBA smile gleaming under the fluorescent lights of our main assembly hall. Your outdated methods are holding iron-hold manufacturing back. We need innovation, not some old-timer stuck in the past. My name's Roger Jameson. I'm 53 years old, and until 30 minutes ago, I was the VP of operations at the company where I'd spent 28 years of my life. The company-wide meeting had been called with 2 hours' notice, mandatory attendance. I should have known something was up. My hands stayed steady at my sides, military training kicking in. The production teams, guys I'd worked shoulder to shoulder with for nearly 3 decades, stared in shock. Some of them had been here almost as long as me. They knew what I'd built, what I'd contributed. Security will escort you out, Chad continued, checking his expensive watch. Your access is already terminated. HR has your final paperwork ready. You have 30 minutes to clear your office. I looked out at the faces in the crowd. Pete Williams, our union rep, had his jaw clenched tight. Rita Lopez from procurement looked like she wanted to say something but couldn't. These were my people. We'd survived 3 recessions together, fought off 2 takeover attempts, and built this place into one of the most efficient heavy machinery operations in the Midwest. Any final words, Roger? Chad asked, that smirk never leaving his face. The silence stretched, 2,500 people waiting to see if the old dog would whimper or bite back. I straightened my shoulders and spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. 28 years here, served my country before that. This company will always be in my blood, no matter where I am. I paused, looking directly at Chad. Sometimes the best lessons come from experience, not textbooks. Chad's smile faltered for just a second. He'd expected me to break down, maybe beg for my job. The meeting ended abruptly. Security appeared, 2 guys I'd hired myself 5 years back. They looked embarrassed as they walked me to my office. My office overlooked the main production floor. Through the windows, I could see the workers going through the motions, but their hearts weren't in it. I packed my photos, my Army Corps of Engineers certificate, and the small American flag I'd kept on my desk. 28 years reduced to 1 cardboard box. Outside in the parking lot, rain soaked through my work jacket as I waited for my ride. My old pickup truck was getting serviced, so I'd caught a ride with Pete that morning. Now I stood alone, watching the place that had been my second home disappear behind sheets of rain. That night, I sat in my kitchen staring at the Ironhold quarterly report. The stock had dipped 8% in after-hours trading. News of my termination had leaked beyond our company walls. Industry forums were buzzing. My phone kept ringing, old Army buddies, former colleagues, people wanting to know what really happened. I ignored most of them, focused instead on something Chad didn't know about. Something I'd been building for 15 years, ever since the first time some MBA tried to tell me how to run operations. At exactly 9:30 p.m., my phone rang. Unknown number. Roger, it's Walter Gibson. I sat up straight. Walter Gibson, chairman of the board, fellow veteran, 68 years old, and tougher than a $2 steak. We'd served together briefly in the late 80s before he went into business, and I went back to school on the GI Bill. Walt, didn't expect to hear from you tonight. Just saw the quarterly shareholder update. Interesting reading, he paused. I'm calling an emergency board meeting for tomorrow, 3 p.m. Can you join us via video conference? As I hung up, my phone buzzed with a text. Chad went too far today. Let's talk privately before this gets complicated. Coffee tomorrow. I set my phone on the counter and smiled for the first time since the meeting. Chad had no idea what he'd stepped in, or that the game had rules he didn't even know existed. I didn't answer Chad's text. The man who'd humiliated me in front of 200 and 500 people could wait. Instead, I spent the night preparing for the board meeting, pulling together 15 years of financial records, efficiency reports, and supplier contracts. My story with Ironhold started back in 1995. I was 25, fresh out of the Army Corps of Engineers with 6 years of service under my belt. The company was struggling then, outdated equipment, declining contracts, and a reputation for late deliveries. During my interview, the old CEO talked about the need for someone who understood both logistics and people management. We need someone who can think on their feet, he'd said. Someone who's not afraid to get their hands dirty. My first project was reorganizing the entire supply chain. Within 8 months, we'd cut delivery times by 35% and reduced waste by half. My second initiative got us our first major government contract in 10 years. By my 5th year, I was running operations for all 4 plants. The warning signs with Chad started 18 months ago. He came in as Chief Strategy Officer, hired by the board to modernize our approach. Harvard MBA, McKinsey background, spoke fluent buzzword. He'd never set foot on a factory floor before Ironhold. First came the consultant reports. Teams of young analysts with clipboards, timing our workers, questioning processes that had been refined over decades. They'd walk around with their tablets asking questions like, "Why do you check this twice?" or "Have you considered automating this step?" These kids didn't understand that checking twice prevented the kind of mistakes that could shut down an entire production line. They didn't know that some processes couldn't be automated because they required the judgment that comes from 20 years of experience. Then came the meetings where my input wasn't requested. Strategy sessions about operations that somehow didn't include the VP of operations. I'd hear about new initiatives secondhand, through my own team members who'd been pulled into planning sessions without my knowledge. Chad wants to implement lean manufacturing protocols. Rita Lopez told me one afternoon. She was head of procurement, been with us for 12 years, knew every supplier in our network. He's bringing in outside consultants to review our vendor relationships. That should have been a red flag. In manufacturing, vendor relationships are everything. You don't just switch suppliers because some consultant found someone cheaper. Quality, reliability, delivery schedules, all of that matters more than saving a few dollars per unit, but Chad didn't see it that way. To him, everything was about the numbers on a spreadsheet. The breaking point was the Morrison Industries contract. I'd worked 12-hour days for weeks developing our bid for their new equipment line. It was potentially our biggest contract in 5 years, $18 million over 3 years for specialized mining equipment. I knew Morrison's operations inside and out. Their previous equipment supplier had failed them twice, delivering substandard machinery that broke down within 6 months. They needed reliability, not just competitive pricing. My proposal focused on durability and service guarantees. Premium materials, extensive testing, on-site maintenance support. The profit margins were smaller, but the relationship would be worth millions in future contracts. The night before the presentation, Chad sent me a text. Taking point on this one, stand by in case they need technical details. That call never came. I watched from my office as Chad's BMW pulled out of the parking lot, heading to the Morrison meeting with my proposal in his briefcase. Morrison signed a 3-year deal worth $18 million. At the celebration, Chad raised his glass in front of the entire executive team. When I first envisioned our approach to clients like Morrison, I knew execution would be everything. The operations team exchanged looks. They knew whose strategy it had been, but nobody said anything. In corporate America, challenging the golden boy is career suicide. That night, I bought another 500 shares of Ironhold stock. It wasn't the first time, and it wouldn't be the last. See, while Chad was spending his bonuses on that BMW and his downtown loft, I was living in the same modest house I'd bought in 1998. My Army discipline kept my expenses low. Every raise, every bonus, every bit of extra cash went into Ironhold stock. It started small. Back in 1995, when I first joined the company, I bought 100 shares with my signing bonus. The stock was trading at $12 per share. Nothing fancy, just a belief that if I was going to dedicate my career to this place, I should own a piece of it. Over the years, as the company grew and my salary increased, I kept buying. 200 shares here, 300 shares there. When we landed the Pentagon contract in 2003, I used my entire performance bonus to buy 800 shares at $34 each. My ex-wife thought I was crazy. Put the money in mutual funds, she'd say. Diversify your portfolio. But I knew Ironhold better than any fund manager ever could. I knew which contracts were coming up for renewal. I knew which product lines were profitable and which were dead weight. The divorce in 2008 actually helped my stock accumulation. Without alimony payments and with my mortgage finally paid off, I could dedicate even more income to buying shares. While everyone else was panicking about the financial crisis, I was buying Ironhold stock at $18 per share, knowing the government infrastructure spending would boost our business within 2 years. By 2010, I owned 8% of the company. By 2015, it was 12%. By 2020, I'd reached 15%. Chad never questioned why I drove a 10-year-old pickup truck while he rolled up in his sports car. He never wondered where my money went. The pattern got worse over the next year. My team members got reassigned to other projects. My budget got cut. My office got moved from the executive floor to the older building across the parking lot. Restructuring, Chad explained when I confronted him. Nothing personal. We're trying to create more cross-functional collaboration. Cross-functional collaboration meant breaking up my operations team and scattering them across different departments where they couldn't work effectively together. It meant decisions about production schedules being made by people who'd never worked a factory floor. Each time he undermined me, I bought more stock. Each time he took credit for my work, I increased my position. The more he pushed me out, the more I owned of the thing he was trying to control. Rita Lopez started bringing me concerns about the new vendor selection process around 6 months ago. These overseas suppliers Chad's pushing, she said during one of our weekly budget meetings. The pricing looks good on paper, but I'm worried about quality control. She showed me bid documents from Tianming Industrial, a Chinese manufacturer that had suddenly become Chad's preferred supplier for steel components. Their quoted prices were 15% below our current domestic suppliers, but Rita had done her homework. Look at their delivery schedules, she said, pointing to the fine print. Lead times of 8-12 weeks, plus shipping. Our current suppliers guarantee 3 to 4 weeks. And look at this warranty language, 6 months maximum, compared to 2 years from American Steel Works. But Chad wasn't interested in Rita's concerns. When she brought up quality control issues, he told her to stay in her lane and focus on cost savings. So she started documenting everything. Purchase orders, supplier communications, specification changes that always seemed to favor the same overseas companies. Rita had been in procurement long enough to smell something fishy. Roger, she said one afternoon, I think you should see these invoices. The invoices Rita showed me that afternoon changed everything. At first glance, they looked routine payment authorizations for consulting services related to vendor evaluation. But something about the timing bothered me. Look at these dates, Rita said, spreading the documents across my desk. Every time we switch to a new overseas supplier, there's a consulting fee paid to Strategic Supply Solutions. Always the same amount, $50,000. I studied the paperwork. Strategic Supply Solutions wasn't a company I recognized, which was odd. After 28 years, I knew every consultant, auditor, and service provider we'd ever worked with. Who authorized these payments? I asked. Chad. Always Chad. And look at this. Rita pulled out another set of documents. The same week we paid Strategic Supply Solutions, there's always a payment to Global Procurement Advisors. Different company, same amount. 2 companies, same payment schedule, same amounts. That's not coincidence, that's a pattern. Rita had been building this file for months, ever since Chad started pushing the Overseas Supplier Initiative. Every questionable vendor decision, every rushed contract approval, every time quality standards got waived for cost savings. There's more, she said, pulling up spreadsheets on her laptop. These consulting companies, I can't find any record of actual work being performed. No reports, no presentations, no deliverables, just invoices and payments. We spent the next 3 hours going through everything. By the end, we'd identified $3.2 million in payments to shell companies that existed only on paper. The pattern was always the same. Chad would recommend a new overseas supplier. These mysterious consulting firms would get paid for vendor evaluation services, and then contracts would be signed with suppliers who consistently delivered subpar materials. The clincher came when Rita showed me the business registration records she'd pulled from the Secretary of State website. Strategic Supply Solutions, she said, pointing to the screen. Registered agent, Michael Winters, she scrolled down, Global Procurement Advisors. Registered agent, Todd McKenna. Winters, I said slowly. Any relation to Chad? His brother-in-law, married to Chad's sister. Rita clicked to another screen. And McKenna was Chad's roommate at Harvard. They were in the same MBA program. There it was. $3.2 million flowing to companies controlled by Chad's family and friends, disguised as legitimate consulting fees. Every time we switched to a cheaper overseas supplier, Chad's network got paid, and Ironhold got stuck with inferior materials and delayed deliveries. It was brilliant, in a criminal sort of way. The cost savings from cheaper suppliers would show up on Chad's performance metrics, making him look like a strategic genius. Meanwhile, the quality problems and delivery delays would be blamed on market conditions or operational issues, my department's problems, not his. That night, I didn't sleep much. I kept thinking about all the production delays we'd suffered over the past 18 months. equipment failures that shouldn't have happened, delivery schedules we couldn't meet because of faulty components. How many contracts had we lost because of quality issues with these overseas suppliers? More importantly, how many of our people had been blamed for problems that weren't their fault? The next morning brought the board meeting. At 2:55 p.m., I connected to the video conference from my home office. One by one, faces appeared on screen. 9 board members, most of whom I'd met only briefly over the years. Chad had always insisted on being the liaison between the board and management. Walter appeared last, his weathered face filling the screen. There he is. Thanks for joining us, Roger. Chad's face popped up next, surprise and anger flashing across his features when he saw me. I believe there's been a miscommunication, he started immediately. Roger's termination was a standard management decision. The board doesn't need to intervene in routine personnel matters. Routine? Walter's voice had that edge I remembered from our Army days. You fired a 28-year employee in front of 2,500 people. Our stock dropped 8%. Nothing routine about that, son. I watched Chad's expression carefully. He was used to controlling information flow to the board. Having me on the call clearly made him uncomfortable. Helen Burke, our audit committee chair, spoke up next. Chad, we've had concerns about the volatility in our supplier relationships. Perhaps you could walk us through the strategic rationale. Chad shifted into presentation mode, pulling up charts and graphs about cost optimization and global competitiveness. For 15 minutes, he painted a picture of Ironhold as a company trapped by legacy thinking and outdated supplier relationships. The offshore strategy has saved us $2.3 million in direct costs over 18 months, he concluded. That's money we can reinvest in automation and modernization. The board nodded appreciatively. On paper, Chad's numbers looked impressive. And what plan is that? Helen asked when Chad mentioned his modernization strategy. Chad launched into his vision. Automation of 3 production lines, elimination of redundant positions, and aggressive expansion of the overseas supplier network. He projected another $5 million in annual savings within 2 years. The board listened politely, some nodding at the projected savings. It sounded reasonable, even progressive. That's the thing about MBA presentations. They always sound good in conference rooms. When he finished, Walter turned to me. Roger, you've been quiet. Thoughts before I could answer, Chad jumped in. With respect, Walter, Roger is no longer with the company. His input isn't relevant to strategic planning. Walter's expression didn't change. Actually, Roger owns 18.3% of outstanding shares, making him our second largest individual shareholder. His input is extremely relevant. The silence that followed was beautiful. Chad's face went through confusion, disbelief, then something close to panic as he processed this information. That's impossible, he managed. Shareholder registry updated last night. Walter confirmed 18.3% accumulated over 15 years, which is exactly why I called this meeting. All eyes turned to me. 15 years of being overlooked, interrupted, and dismissed had prepared me for this moment. Chad's cost savings are real. I began sharing my screen with the financial projections I'd prepared, but they're costing us more than we're saving. These overseas suppliers he's brought in, their quality control is inconsistent, their delivery schedules are unreliable, and their total cost of ownership is higher once you factor in rework, delays, and lost contracts. I clicked to the next slide. More importantly, switching to overseas suppliers will cost us our government contracts. Buy American requirements mean we lose $12 million in annual revenue if we can't prove domestic sourcing. The board leaned forward. This was information Chad apparently hadn't shared, but the real problem, I continued, isn't strategic. It's criminal. The room went deadly quiet. Chad's face had gone from pale to flushed in the span of 5 seconds. I'm talking about $3.2 million in kickbacks, disguised as consulting fees. I continued bringing up Rita's documentation. Payments to shell companies registered to Chad's brother-in-law, Michael Winters, and his Harvard roommate, Todd McKenna. I shared the screen showing the business registration records, the payment schedules, and the correlation between supplier contracts and consulting fees. 15 months of systematic fraud laid out in black and white. These consulting companies exist only on paper, I explained. No offices, no employees, no deliverables. Just bank accounts that receive money every time we switch to one of Chad's preferred overseas suppliers. Helen Burke was frantically taking notes. 2 other board members had pulled out their phones, presumably calling their lawyers. Chad tried to recover. This is a desperate attempt to save face. Roger's manipulating financial data he doesn't understand. These consulting relationships provide valuable strategic insights into emerging markets. And which consulting reports? I interrupted. Because Rita Lopez in procurement has been looking for any work product from these companies for 6 months. All she's found are invoices. Walter Gibson's expression had turned stone cold. Chad, are you saying these payments were authorized? Of course they were authorized. I have full discretionary authority for strategic consulting up to $75,000 per engagement. These relationships are essential for what? Helen Burke's voice cut through his explanation. Strategic Supply Solutions was incorporated the same day you approved the first contract with Tianming Industrial. That's not a coincidence. The next 30 minutes were brutal. Board member after board member asked pointed questions that Chad couldn't answer. Why were the consulting fees always exactly $50,000? Why did the payments correlate perfectly with supplier contracts? Why was there no competitive bidding for consulting services? With each question, Chad's explanations became more desperate and contradictory. By 4:30 p.m., the vote wasn't even close. Chad was terminated immediately, with cause, no severance, no transition period, no golden parachute. His access was revoked before the meeting ended. The board also voted unanimously to appoint me as interim CEO, with a mandate to investigate the full extent of the fraud and restore operational integrity. Roger, Walter said as the meeting concluded, I'm authorizing you to bring in forensic auditors and work with law enforcement as needed. This company's reputation depends on us handling this properly. Chad remained on the call until the end, his face a mask of rage and disbelief. When it was just the two of us, he finally spoke. You think you've won something? You have no idea what you've done. This industry runs on relationships I've built. Suppliers, customers, competitors, they all know me personally. You're going to destroy everything I've built here. Chad, I said calmly, the only thing you built here was a criminal enterprise. The real relationships with our workers, our domestic suppliers, our long-term customers, those were never yours to begin with. I disconnected before he could respond. The next morning felt surreal. Walking through those same security doors that had escorted me out 48 hours earlier, but this time as the company's chief executive. The guard who'd looked embarrassed to walk me out now nodded respectfully and called me sir. Word had traveled fast. Pete Williams was waiting by my office with a cup of coffee and a huge grin. Never seen anything like it, he said as we walked through the main production floor. Yesterday, half the plant thought the company was doomed. Today, they're talking about getting back to what we do best. Rita Lopez met me outside the executive conference room with a stack of files. Forensic accounting team arrives Monday, she said. FBI Financial Crimes Unit wants to interview you Tuesday. And I've prepared a list of domestic suppliers who can replace every overseas contractor Chad brought in. The executive team meeting that morning was tense but productive. Chad's people were professionals first, and they could read the writing on the wall. Within 2 weeks, we'd implemented a complete reversal of Chad's offshore strategy. The investigation moved quickly. The FBI had seen this type of scheme before corporate executives using shell companies to skim money from supplier relationships. Chad's mistake was being too systematic about it. The pattern was so clear that even a first-year law student could have prosecuted the case. Michael Winters, Chad's brother-in-law, cooperated immediately in exchange for immunity. He provided bank records showing the flow of money from the shell companies to Chad's personal accounts. Todd McKenna tried to fight the charges, but folded when federal investigators threatened him with money laundering and tax evasion charges. Chad himself was arrested 6 weeks later at his downtown loft. The local business journal ran a front-page story with his mugshot under the headline, "Former Ironhold Executive Charged in $3.26 Fraud Scheme." By then, I was too busy to pay much attention. Replacing overseas suppliers with domestic ones had created unexpected opportunities. American Steel Works, our original supplier, not only matched the offshore pricing, but guaranteed better delivery schedules and quality control. The government contracts started flowing again once we could prove domestic sourcing. Within 4 months, we'd landed a $45 million contract to supply heavy equipment for military infrastructure projects, the largest single contract in company history. 6 months later, I stood before another company-wide meeting. This time, the news was good. Ironhold had not only recovered from the Chad Winters scandal, but was posting record profits. When I started here 28 years ago, I told the crowd this company was built on a simple principle: do good work, treat people fairly, and success will follow. We lost sight of that for a while, but we're back on track. The applause was genuine. These weren't people clapping because they had to. They were celebrating because their jobs were secure and their company had integrity again. Chad got 4 years federal time. Last I heard, he was serving his sentence at a minimum security facility somewhere in Ohio, probably teaching business ethics classes to other white-collar criminals. Me? I got something I never expected at 53, the chance to prove that experience, loyalty, and patience still matter in American business. The board made my CEO appointment permanent after 6 months, and I plan to finish my career the same way I started it, building things that last. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about destroying your enemy. It's about building something so much better that their failure becomes irrelevant. Chad didn't just lose his job and his freedom, he lost his legacy. History won't remember him as the MBA hotshot who modernized iron-hold manufacturing. It'll remember him as the criminal who nearly destroyed it. And iron-hold? We're stronger than ever, employing more Americans, building better equipment, and proving that doing things right still matters in this country. In the end, patience and preparation beat flash and credentials every single time, because real success isn't built on PowerPoint presentations. It's built on the trust of people who've watched you work for decades. Sometimes the best way to defeat someone isn't to destroy them directly, but to simply outlast them while building something so solid that their schemes crumble against it like waves against a seawall.